Hello there friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Films. My name is Alan. Today we'll be discussing an issue that has been hanging over Boba Fett for quite some time, and that is the issue of his identity. Is he a Mandalorian, or is he just some ruthless clone bounty hunter without any culture or roots? So the story of Boba Fett started off with some concept art by the legendary concept artist Ralph McQuarrie. At the time, he and art director Joe Johnston had been assigned the task to redesign the stormtroopers for Empire Strikes Back. What they ended up with was a more aggressive and intimidating trooper with white armor. Unfortunately, due to production costs, this design was scrapped and they ended up just using the original stormtrooper design instead. Lucas didn't want to get rid of this cool new design, and so the character Boba Fett was created. And he was loosely based on Clint Eastwood's character in Sergio Leone's Man with No Name. Dave Filoni and Jon Favreau really do capture this aspect of Boba Fett with their Cobb Vanth character in this second season of The Mandalorian. Now, interesting fact, Boba Fett's first appearance in Star Wars on screen actually occurred in the Star Wars Christmas special. He had his own little story arc with Luke Skywalker before he was properly introduced in the Empire Strikes Back film. Now, the fans immediately loved Boba Fett, and so he was given a backstory treatment and more content. But it wasn't really until the prequel era that we began seeing this whole entire controversy about him not being a Mandalorian emerge. Which is kind of ironic because Boba Fett technically is the first Mandalorian. He definitely inspired the creation of the entire race, including all the Legends content we know and love, ranging from KOTOR to the Republic Commandos. And so without Boba Fett, there are no Mandalorians. But things kind of changed during the introduction of the prequel series and the Clone Wars TV series. A new faction known as the New Mandalorians were introduced, and they're really unlike anything else we've seen in Mandalorian history. They're almost a reaction to the violent and chaotic nature of this warrior race. You see, the Mandalorians' fascination with warfare and killing each other has left their society and planet in complete ruins. Even though Mandalorians were amongst the best fighters in the galaxy, continuous warfare was taking a toll on their numbers, and their society was unable to properly advance and grow as a result. The new Mandalorians were led by Duchess Satine Kryze, and she was a pacifist in nature and completely rejected the ancient warrior ways of the Mandalore. The new Mandalorians wanted to reform Mandalore into a more modern planet with a more balanced and rational society and economy. The new Mandalorians, despite their pacifist nature, actually start a war with the more traditional faction known as Death Watch. Death Watch wanted to just basically pillage and rampage across the galaxy. They were a bit regressive in a lot of their views, including how they chose their leaders, which was usually through trial by combat. This obviously did not lead to the selection of good leaders, just leaders who could fight. So the new Mandalorians and Death Watch are kind of like the extreme left and right wing of our political discourse today. The only difference is the fact that these Mandalorians all are of Nordic and Scandinavian descent for some reason. The new Mandalorians would eventually win their war against the Death Watch with the help of the Jedi and the Republic. Obi-Wan Kenobi, who had assisted Satine Kryze during the Mandalorian Civil War, would serve as a special envoy to Mandalore during the Clone Wars. The new Mandalorians, having just won their peace a few decades ago, fought hard to remain neutral during this new galactic conflict. When Obi-Wan Kenobi meets the new Mandalorian Prime Minister Almec, he actually questions the politician about Death Watch returning to power. He also mentions his own encounter with the bounty hunter known as Jango Fett, aka Boba Fett's clone father. Almec, who has clearly heard of Fett, dismisses him as nothing more than a mere bounty hunter who has acquired Mandalorian armor through unknown means.
Jango Fett was a common bounty hunter. How he acquired that armor is beyond me.
Now, later on, we find out that Prime Minister Almec is actually a political hack and a complete scumbag. He actually would betray his own people and serve as the puppet figurehead for Maul's Shadow Collective government when he takes over the planet later on in the war. And unfortunately, his words are the most commonly cited reason why people believe that Boba Fett is not a Mandalorian. So George Lucas played a big part in the creation of the Clone Wars TV series. He basically had showrunner Dave Filoni work beneath him as almost a protege. As a matter of fact, now with Lucas gone from Star Wars, Dave Filoni is like the last tied to that other age of Star Wars we all know and love. George Lucas, oddly enough, still views Boba Fett as the spaghetti western-style character he originally envisioned him as. Now, George Lucas apparently told Dave Filoni that he does not like the expanded universe treatment of Boba Fett and the Mandalorians. He believes that the creation of the Mandalorians really cheapens who Boba Fett is as a character because he destroys all that mystique and and kind of mystery surrounding this helmeted character. Dave Filoni, who kind of has his feet in both camps because he also is a huge fan of the EU as well, basically just follows George Lucas's guidance here and creates the new Mandalorian's criticism against Jango Fett. But then again, Prime Minister Almak's statement is not 100% confirmation that Boba Fett is not a Mandalorian. As a matter of fact, the Prime Minister's character comes into question time and time again in the Clone Wars series, so anything he says is also potentially false. In order to really understand Boba Fett and what his identity is, we have to take a look at Jango Fett's backstory, because Jango Fett spent more time with Boba Fett than anyone else. Now, the canon story of Jango Fett's upbringing, like a lot of canon stories, are pretty light on content and borrow heavily from the expanded universe. And so my usual philosophy here is until Disney canon replaces or directly contradicts the expanded universe, then the EU stories are still potentially true. Jango Fett in canon is a Mandalorian foundling who was born on Concord Dawn, and he also did fight in the Mandalorian Civil Wars. Beyond that, we don't really know much about his background. But this story is actually identical to his much more detailed expanded universe story. In that yet to be proven false version of his life, Jango Fett was born on Concord Dawn in a farm. His father was a local protector who was killed by a group of Death Watch soldiers who were raiding the local area. Jango Fett is rescued by a Mandalorian named Yaster Mareel, who belongs to the true Mandalorian faction. This was a legendary faction of Mandalorian warriors that represented a middle ground between the more extreme new Mandalorians and the Death Watch factions. The true Mandalorians embraced their warrior roots, but also imposed the strict Super Commando Codex that governed their behaviors and actions on the battlefield and while working for clients. AKA, it was frowned upon to kill their clients and rape and pillage innocent people, women, and children. Jango Fett would fully embrace this life as a super commando, and he saw Yaster Mareel as a father figure. Unfortunately, Death Watch would strike time and time again, and Jango Fett and his true Mandalorians would end up losing everything. Jango would spend several years as a slave after the true Mandalorians' defeat, and his spirit was almost broken as a result. But when Jango Fett had Boba Fett, he would return back to his Mandalorian roots and try to teach his clone son everything he knew about the Super Commando Codex. At the same time, he probably also taught his son to be flexible and not ideologically weighed down by any belief system. And so you could say that Jango Fett is not a true Mandalorian, but that would be a very silly kind of notion. And that's because if you understand Mandalorian culture, it's never really been about who you are or where you're from or even who your parents are. The Mandalorians were always known as a very inclusive culture, and many of their members were actually adopted. As long as you could fight well and follow their ways, you're accepted. Plus, Concord Dawn is technically a Mandalorian territory anyway, and it's home to some of the most Mandalorians, I guess you could say. And Jango Fett clearly embraced the traditional Mandalorian culture in a way that individuals like Prime Minister Almak never did, and probably never could. And that's because being Mandalorian is like being an American. It's not about your ethnicity or your religion, it's really just believing in a shared set of values. In Mandalorian culture, those shared values are the Mandalorian Code. And Jango Fett definitely passed a lot of those codes and values down to Boba Fett. And so in the scene where Boba Fett and Bo-Katan meet for the first time, they have the following exchange in dialogue.
You are not a Mandalorian.
Never said I was.
What Boba Fett says here actually doesn't matter all that much. I mean, maybe he just is against labels. Maybe he doesn't even see himself as a Mandalorian, but that doesn't actually mean that he's not a Mandalorian. Because ultimately, a good portion of his mannerisms and how he conducts himself is very Mandalorian, whether he likes it or not. And that's because identity is not chosen by an individual. It's just a collection of behavior, beliefs, and personality traits that makes up an individual. So there you have it, guys. That is our analysis on the Boba Fett question. Let me know in the comment section below what you think. Also, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification button down below. My name is Alan, reminding you that life is a movie, and you are the protagonist.